Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our shir tonight, the Monday night Chassidus shir. And being that tonight is Gimmel Tammuz, we are going to focus our shir on the theme of Gimmel Tammuz in a general way, and more specifically this year, which marks 30 years since the Rebbe's passing in Tafshin Nun Daled in 1994. So the day of Gimmel Tammuz, for not just Hasidim, but for world Jewry, is a very, very significant day. It's a day which is connected to the Nasi Hadar, to the leader of the generation, to the Rebbe. And it's a day where we strengthen ourselves and our connection to the Rebbe, to his teachings, and more importantly, to his vision and mission for the world and for humanity. And that is to bring the world to a state of Geula, to bring the world to a state of redemption. And so whilst on one hand, this is a day which is certainly tinged with sadness and a sense of loss, in that we are no longer able to see the Rebbe's physical presence, but it's a day where we are supposed to take strength, and a day that we are supposed to make resolutions, to resolve, to make hachlotas, to improve ourselves in continuing in the ways that the Rebbe has taught us and continues to teach us through his teachings, and to actualize the vision and mission that he established at the very beginning of his leadership in the year 1951, Tafshin Yud Aleph. The Rebbe set forth the mission of our generation, the Dor HaShvi, the seventh generation, starting from the Alter Rebbe, and that our job is to bring the Shechina, to bring God's presence down into the world by bringing the Geula. So I'd like to just start off, before we address the significance of Gimmel Tammuz this year, which is 30 years, but I'd like to talk about just the concept of a Rebbe, the concept of having a Nasi. And this is an idea which I shared on Shabbos morning in a drasha based on Parshas Korach, because Parshas Korach, the parsha we read last week, is very much essentially about the concept of a Rebbe. Moshe Rabbeinu, as we refer to him as Moshe, our Rebbe, the Moshe in every generation, is the continuum of the first leader of Klal Yisrael, and that was Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the manig of Klal Yisrael, was challenged by Korach. Korach challenged Moshe Rabbeinu with a claim that he said that Ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim, that all of the people, all of the Jewish people are holy, ubesoicham Hashem, and Hashem is in their midst. And if so, why are you exalted, and why are you greater, more powerful as a leader over the rest of the Jewish people? And what he was referring to was the fact that every Jewish person witnessed the revelation at Sinai. Every Jewish person saw the divine presence speak to them face to face. And therefore, why do we need to have a Moshe Rabbeinu? What is the need to have a leader, to have a Nasi that connects us to Hashem, when in fact each one of us have our own connection to Hashem? And if we take this idea a little bit deeper and analyze the words of Korach, our sages, Chazal, tell us, Korach pikei achaya. Korach was not just a rabble raiser. He was not just a commoner. Korach was a wise person. Korach was a sage. He was a scholar. And therefore, in his claim, it was not just one of jealousy of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of the Jewish people, but there was a deep, profound idea that he was expressing. Profound not only in terms of a perspective of equality between people, but on a mystical level as well. We know that every Jew, every Yid possesses an neshama, possesses a soul, and that soul is a chelek kam mimah mamish. As the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that soul is a part of God, literally. And every single Jewish person possesses that soul, from the greatest tzaddik to the most lowly, simple of Jews. And by dint of the fact that we have the divine presence within us, the fact that we have a spark of God within us, on that level, we are all equal. We don't need to have someone else to connect us to Hashem. We all have that innate connection ourselves. And that was what Korach was saying to Moshe Rabbeinu when he said all of the Jewish people are holy. The words ubesoicham Hashem, and Hashem is in their midst, can also mean that Hashem is within them. That each one of them has a soul, they have the divine presence within them, and therefore, why do we need you to be a leader above us? So that was the challenge of Korach. It's written in various Svarim, particularly the Tiferet Shloim of Radomsk, is that the Seder, the way Hashem created the world from its very inception, is that in every generation there is the tzaddik yesod olam. There are many tzaddikim in every generation, but of all of the tzaddikim, there is one tzaddik who is referred to as the foundation of the world, because all of hashpa'is, all of the blessings, materially and spiritually, come to the world in the merit of and via the tzaddik yesod olam. And in each generation, there was an opposition to the tzaddik yesod olam. And it's very Shlomo traces this back, that this was the dispute between Cain and Hevel. This was the dispute between Avram and Lot. And this was why the brothers rejected Yosef. They did not want to have to receive their sustenance. They received their spiritual and physical hashpais via Yosef, and therefore they challenged his authority. And that, of course, culminated in the time of Moshiach. So the essential answer is that Korach, to a certain degree, was right. It's brought in the writings of the Arizal that Korach had a messianic perspective. That's why Korach wanted to be the Kohen Gadol, because he foresaw a time where the Leviim would become the Kohenim. So Korach was very messianic in his world outlook. And therefore, he saw that every Jew possesses within them the presence of Hashem, has a spark of the Creator, has a neshama. And because in the Messianic time, the times of Moshiach, that spark will be revealed. Therefore, he said that there is no need for a Nasi. Where did he make a mistake? Is that we are not yet in the times of Moshiach. Right now, whilst it's true that every Yid has a neshama, every Yid has a spark of the Creator within them, but it is hidden deep within us. It's hidden within us because of our Yetzer Hara, because of our evil inclination. It is buried under layers and layers of materiality and the physicality of the world. And therefore, we need to have a paradigm of godliness within the world who can enable us to reveal the godliness within inside of ourselves. And that is the role of a Nasi. The role of a Nasi, the role of Moshe Rabbeinu in each generation, the role of the Mani Gadol is to enable and assist us in bringing out the godly spark within ourselves. Indeed, someone asked the Rebbe once, it was Rabbi Yehuda, Yehuda Avner, who was formerly, he was the consul, the Israeli consulate representative in Australia, and he asked the Rebbe this very point: what is the job of a Rebbe? And the Rebbe's answer was that the job of a Rebbe is to light up the candles. The neshama is likened to a candle, and the Rebbe's job is to light up the neshamas of the Jewish people. To which Yehuda Avner asked the Rebbe, Rebbe, did you light my candle? And the Rebbe answered, no, but I gave you the match. Meaning that the role of a Rebbe is not, like Korach understood, someone who is there and it is our only way to connect to Hashem. On the contrary, we all have within us an essential, unbreakable connection to Hashem, but it is through connecting ourselves to the Nasi Ador, through learning their teachings and following their directives, that we are able to reveal that spark within ourselves. And indeed, that was part of the messianic vision, the vision of Moshiach that the Rebbe had for the world, which culminated in the last few years prior to Gimmel Tammuz, that the Rebbe said that now is a time where every Jew has to reveal the Moshiach inside of themselves, to reveal the spark of godliness within inside of themselves. And that level is referred to as the Yechidah Shebenefesh, the very essence of the soul, that first part of us which is absolute sublime godliness and goodness. So that's the role of a Rebbe. Now, we're sitting here tonight, Gimmel Tammuz, 30 years since we no longer see the Rebbe in a physical sense. We have the Rebbe's teachings in many forms. We have the Rebbe's shluchim, the Rebbe's emissaries throughout the world, continuing to do the Rebbe's work within the world, but we don't physically see the Rebbe. So what is the lesson that we could take, particularly from the significance of this year, in strengthening our service of God, and specifically through revealing that spark of Moshiach, that spark of goodness and godliness within inside of ourselves, which is the job of the Rebbe in each generation. So throughout the Rebbe's leadership, the Rebbe in his various talks made a big deal about certain dates and certain anniversaries. It seems an arbitrary thing that the difference between 29 years and 30 years, or 49 years and 50 years, 99 years and 100 years, it just seems to be one incremental increase. But the Rebbe explained that not only when we have a large, round, whole number, that is something which is significant and it gives us extra extra arousal, and we become more inspired when there is an anniversary, a 10th anniversary, a 20th, a 30th, a 100th, etc., in a round number. But there's also deeper layers of significance to those numbers themselves as well. Not just that it's a round number, but there is a significance to the number 30 as well. And therefore, what we should be reflecting on is that message specifically as the timely message that we should be focusing on for Gimmel Tammuz of this year, and the lesson that we need to take and apply in our day-to-day lives. So when we talk about the number 30, the number 30 is a significant number we find in Pirkei Avos. In the end of the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, it goes through different stages of a person's life. And it says, Ben Shloishim L'Koyach, that the age of 30 is a time when a person attains Koyach. Koyach means strength. And that is something which kicks in when a person completes 30 years within this world, they've attained Koyach. So that's something which we find already in the writings of Chazal. Elsewhere in Pirkei Avos tells us that Hamalchus Niknes B'Shloishim, that kingship is acquired through 30 qualities. There are 30 qualities which a king is endowed with, and therefore the number 30 is a number which Chazal attached to the idea of kingship or the idea of leadership as well. But what I'd like to speak about today is the perspective of Chassidus. When we look in the writings of the Rebbeim, the Chabad Rebbes, starting from the Alter Rebbe all the way through to our Rebbe, particularly in the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek, we see that the significance of that is already written in the times of Chazal, but the Rebbeim take it a step further to explain the mystical significance of the number 30. So what is the mystical significance of number 30? In Tafshin Mem, in 1980, it was 30 years after the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who was the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. He passed away in the year 1950. And 30 years later, in the year 1980, the Rebbe spoke a lot about the concept of 30 years and the significance of the passing of 30 years. At other times of other significant events, such as the liberation of the Frierdiker Rebbe from incarceration in Soviet Russia in the year Tafresh Pei Zayin in 1927, 30 years after that anniversary, the Rebbe again spoke about the significance of the number 30, of Shloishim Shana. And the Rebbe explains that the idea of 30 years, when we have the passage of 30 years, it represents a Tkufa Chadasha. 30 years represents one paradigm. It represents one state of existence that comes to an end after 30 years. And when that comes to an end, we need to upgrade ourselves. We need to lift ourselves up to a higher degree of service. We need to lift ourselves up to a new plane, to a new plateau with the strength that we have taken from those 30 years. Now, before launching into what the Rebbe shares, I'd like to share a fascinating idea which is communicated in a letter by the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father, Reb Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, was a great Kabbalist and a Rav in the Ukraine. And the Rebbe had a correspondence with his father. The Rebbe had moved over abroad, was in Germany, was in France, was in Poland, in Latvia, etc. And the Rebbe's father would send letters to him, but the Rebbe's father's letters were not like we would send letters. When we send letters to one another or we send letters to our family members, those letters tend to be about correspondence, about what's happening in your life, what's happening in your world, what's happening in your home. But the Rebbe's father, being that the Rebbe's father was a Kabbalist, was a Makubal, that was his entire perspective. Everything he saw, dates, places, names, was all viewed through that lens of the teachings of Kabbalah. Now, we know that the Rebbe's birthday is Yud Aleph Nisan. The Rebbe was born in the year Tafresh Samach Beis in 1902, and the Rebbe's father would send letters with blessings to the Rebbe and to the Rebbetzin for the upcoming Yom Tov of Pesach, and would also give blessings to the Rebbe for his birthday on Yud Aleph Nisan. And in the year Taf, in the 30th year of the Rebbe's birthday, in the year Tafresh Tzadik Beis, so the Rebbe's father wrote about the significance of turning 30 years. Again, the idea of a passage of 30 years. And he quotes a teaching from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, which is in turn based on Tanya. The Alter Rebbe in the book of Tanya talks about a famous Kabbalistic idea that there are different levels of the neshama. The lower levels of the neshama are nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh, generally speaking, is our animative soul. It's the level of the soul which gives us movement, functionality, and life. There is the ruach, which is the emotional component of our soul, our feelings of love and fear. And then we have neshama, which is the intellectual component of the soul, chachma, bina, and das. And every Jew possesses these three levels, the levels of nefesh, ruach, neshama. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that each bechina u'madrega, each one of these three levels of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, comprises 10 dimensions. And these are the 10 koiches hanefesh, the 10 powers of the soul, which parallel the 10 divine spheres. 3 are intellectual, 7 are emotional. These are what we generally refer to as the 10 spheres. So being that each layer of the soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, possesses within it all 10 levels of Chabad, Chagas, and Nihim, therefore that gives rise to a total of 30 dimensions. These 3 levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama, as we're going to see over the course of the evening, are the lower levels of the soul which are invested within the body, or what we describe as the consciousness of the neshama. It's the conscious levels of the neshama which are determined by our intellectual and our emotional functioning. But then we have deeper levels of the neshama, chaya and yechida, or the essence of the soul, which is beyond the consciousness, but rather what we describe as the supra-consciousness of the neshama. So the Rebbe's father writes that after 30 years, when a person reaches 30 years of age, they've completed 30 years, there is a shleimus, there is a fullness and completion within these 3 levels of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the way each one comprises the gamut of the 10 faculties, the 10 koiches hanefesh. And therefore, once one reaches that shleimus, they graduate to a higher level of existence. And with that, he explains Pirkei Avos, which says, Ben shloshim lakoyach. When a person reaches 30 years, they come to koyach. What is koyach? So the Rebbe says that koyach, the Rebbe's father, I should say, says that koyach is a Rashi Tevis. It's an acronym for keser, chachma. These 2 spheros, keser and chachma, represent generally the levels of the soul which are beyond logic. When we talk about nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the conscious levels of the soul, we talk about the intellect, that really starts from bin, das, and onwards. But keser, which represents the deepest inner desire of the soul, which is for oneness with Hashem, and chachma, which is the bittul, the surrender of the soul to Hashem, those are beyond the 30. And therefore, when a person attains 30 years old, says the Rebbe's father in typical style of Kabbalah, ben shloshim lakoyach, they've now completed, they've now perfected, they've now reached the shleimus in the lower levels of their neshama, which is their intellect and their emotion. And now they reach a koyach, they graduate to a higher level when they are able to tap into the keser and chachma, the inner depths and the super-rational levels of the soul, which are beyond nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and then live with that, to draw that down into their consciousness, to draw that down into their life, to draw that down into their intellect, emotion, and ultimately in their behaviors. So that's the idea that the Rebbe's father brings. And it's based on a teaching of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is found in the Ha'aros and Kitzurim on Tanya, where he explains this idea that 30 represents the fullness or completion or perfection of the 3 lower levels of the soul. In that same place and elsewhere, the Tzemach Tzedek discusses other dimensions or other manifestations or significant features of the number 30. So the Tzemach Tzedek explains as follows, and this is another Kabbalistic idea, but hopefully we'll explain it out as well. Seder Hishtalshalos, the order of creation, as it comes to be from the divine, from the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, to create the finite world. There is a concept of spheros. There is a concept of divine energies or divine building blocks through which Hashem reflects his light in order to create and interact with the world. These spheros have kalim, vessels, and oiros, the light that shines through them. In Kabbalah, it brings a metaphor. If you have a stained glass window, so you can have a light source, and as the light shines through different colors of the glass, it translates into a different color as well. So too, there are 10 vessels, there are 10 spheroids through which Hashem shines his light, and depending whether it's a vessel of chesed, gevura, kindness, severity, etc., it will manifest in a way of kindness or severity and the like within the world. So there are 10 kalim, 10 vessels of the spheroids. Then there are 10 oiros pnimim, 10 what we call inner lights, the lights which are infused within the world order, within the vessels of the spheroids. And then there are 10 oiros makifim. Makif means to encompass or to surround. And what it means it's a level of godliness which is beyond being enclosed within vessels or beyond the natural progression of godly light into the world. So the Tzemach Tzedek says that the number 30 represents really the totality of Seder Hishtalshelus. We have the 10 Kalim of the Spheros, the 10 Oros Pnimim, the 10 inner lights that are invested within those vessels, and then the 10 Oros Makifim, 10 encompassing lights, 10 lights which are beyond being enclosed within the vessels. So that's another idea associated with the number 30, and we're going to come back to that as well. We know Chassidus talks about different worlds, the worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, that these are general worlds within the order or the progression of creation. The lower worlds, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, which in the micro sense of man correspond to the lower levels of Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, each one of those worlds also possesses the 10 spheres. There are the 10 spheres in the world of Bria, 10 spheres in the world of Yetzira, and 10 spheres in the world of Asiya. Again, giving rise to the number 30. So far we've discussed 3 30s. There's the 30 which is within the soul, the shleimus and perfection of Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, the lower conscious levels of the soul. We've spoken about the 30 in terms of the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And then in a more broader sense, the entirety of Seder Hishtalshelus, the spiritual cosmology, we have the 10 Kalim, the 10 vessels of the Spheros, the 10 Oros Pnimim, and then we have the 10 Oros Makifim. And in all of these, once 30 years has been accomplished, whatever that 30 years is, if it's 30 years from one's birth, if it's 30 years from the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe, if it's 30 years from the day of passing of a tzaddik, after 30 years, the influence of the significance of that date should have percolated through all of the 30 levels that define our consciousness, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, all of the 30 which defines the Seder Hishtalshelus, the consciousness of existence and the lower worlds. And as we go from the threshold of within 30 years to beyond 30 years, we now need to come to Ben Shloshim Lakoyach. We now need to reach a higher level dimension of Avodah, which goes beyond the consciousness, and we touch that super consciousness. We're able to touch the very essence of godliness within the soul and the godliness which lies beyond the worlds entirely. In the year Tafshin Yud Zayin, in the year 1957, it was 30 years from the anniversary of the Frierdiker Rebbe being liberated from prison. And the Rebbe said that when a person comes to 30 years of such an anniversary, we have to make a cheshbon nefesh. We have to make a stock take, a spiritual stock take. How has the 30 years since that event influenced and affected us in our avodah? And the Rebbe on the aside says that sometimes we make such a stock take and we could fall short and we feel downhearted. But then we need to remember the importance of serving Hashem with simcha, always serving Hashem in a joyous state, no matter what. One of the ideas that the Rebbe spoke about in Tafshin Mem, which was 30 years after the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and 30 years after the Rebbe had accepted the leadership of the Chabad movement, the Rebbe connected to the opening of the book of Yechezkel. Yechezkel was known as the greatest Navi, the greatest of prophets since the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. And in the very opening of the book of Yechezkel, the first chapter, we have perhaps the greatest nevuah, the greatest prophecy of all time, where he describes the Merkava, the vision of the divine throne, where he saw God's presence with all of the celestial angels. This is the Haftarah that we read on the day of Shavuos, because just as at Matan Torah, the heavens opened and the Jewish people got a glimpse of the divine throne. So too, Yechezkel had this vision, this tremendous vision, greater than all of the other prophets experienced. And in the very opening of the book of Yechezkel that introduces this prophecy, it says, Vayhi b'shloishim shana, that it was in the 30th year, Baravi b'chamisha l'chodesh, in the 4th month, which interesting is the month of Tammuz, b'chamisha l'chodesh, on the 5th day of the month, v'ani b'soich hagoyla. Says Yechezkel, I was in the midst of exile. The temple had been destroyed at that stage. The Jewish people were in Galus Bavel, and Yechezkel had gone into exile together with his brethren. He was there in Galus Bavel, Al Nahar Kvar, and he was by the banks of the river Kvar. The river Kvar is a tributary that comes off the Euphrates River. And Yechezkel describes that he was in Galus, he was in exile in Bavel. He was sitting or standing by the Nahar Kvar, the river Kvar, and Niftachu Hashamayim, and at that moment the heavens opened. Va'ere maris Elokim, and I saw visions of God. And then he goes on to describe the various visions that he saw. And the Rebbe took this pasuk, which opens with the words Vayhi b'shloishim shana, that it was in the 30th year, that is a message for the passing of 30 years. How so? So after the 30 years, Yechezkel found himself in Galus, but at that time, he was able to reach the greatest of visions. He was able to see the greatest of visions of the divine presence, of the divine throne, specifically from his state in Galus, particularly from where he was in exile. Just to share an anecdote or an adage, a Melitzas Haloshin, the Rebbe quotes this in a number of places. The pasuk says that Yechezkel was al Nahar Kvar, on the Kvar river. The word Kvar, Kaf, base, Resh, also means Kvar, it already was. And the Rebbe says that represents the coldness or the indifference that the Yetzer Hara brings to us when we hear something that we've heard before. A person can hear a wondrous Torah thought, but because it's something that we've heard before, because it's not completely novel, we say, Kvar Shamaiti, I've already heard this. And as a result of that, we don't allow ourselves to become enthused and excited by hearing the Vart, because we say, Kvar, it's something I've already heard. It's something from the past. And therefore, if we take this idea, Yechezkel was B'soich HaGoyla. B'soich can mean he was in the midst of exile, but can also mean that he was deep, deep in exile. He was so deep in exile that he was al Nahar Kvar. He was at a place where the Yetzer Hara comes and tells us that whatever was in the past, Kvar, it was already in the past. And that's the tragedy of Golus. The tragedy of Golus is that Golus, as it goes longer and longer, we look back at the distant past of the time we had a Beis HaMikdash, or the time that we were able to see the Rebbe and the like. And with each passing year, it becomes more and more Kvar. It becomes more and more distant as we become more B'soich HaGoyla, as we become further and further into the darkness of Golus, into the darkness of exile. And yet, it was Dafka in that moment, in the darkness of exile, Al Nahar Kvar, when the Yetzer Hara comes to us and tells us Kvar, it's something from the past, and it's you're never going to get back there. It was Dafka there, Va'ere Maris Elokim, Niftuch Hashamayim, the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. It was specifically in that time, at that moment. So I was thinking, it was Lamed Shana, and it's, as I say, it's a very difficult and bitter day to think that 30 years, no, we didn't think after the Rebbe spoke in Tafshin Nun Aleph and Tafshin Nun Beis so strongly and so urgently and so passionately that Moshiach's coming is imminent, we didn't think that we were going to be in Galus 30 years later. And to be sitting here 30 years later, outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, without being reunited with the Rebbe, is a very, very challenging and a difficult place to be. And as a result of that, we find ourselves B'soich HaGoyla. We are deep in Galus. Galus is a time where we don't see the divine presence. Now, the divine presence could refer to the time when Hashem's presence shone in the Beis HaMikdash, but as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the divine presence also manifests itself in the presence of tzaddikim in the world and the miracles that they perform. So we ourselves don't see the divine presence not only we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, but we no longer are able to see the Nasi, the Manig Ador, to be able to see our Rebbe. So we are very much Besoich HaGoilo, as the Rebbe would describe, Besoich Golus Kapul and Mechupul, a very deep and doublefold darkness of exile. And when we come to such a day of Gimmel Tammuz, year after year, and we hit a milestone of 30 years, the Yetzer Hara inside of a person can come to us and say that we're on Nahar Kvar. What is a Nahar? A river. A river is a flow of vitalizing water. That's why Torah is likened to water. It's likened to a river. So we can say that a Nahar represents a hashpah. And it's very easy for the Yetzer Hara to make us feel despondent that we are at a time of a Nahar Kvar, that there was a Nahar. There was a great and mighty river in the physical presence of the Rebbe, giving us Torah teachings, giving us dollars and farbrengens and inspiration, etc., etc., etc. But now we're Nahar Kvar. That's something we look back on with nostalgia. It's something we look back as something from the past. It's something that was, and something that we long for, that we reminisce about, that we yearn for, but it's something from the past. And that's something which not only our own Yetzer Haras, but people outside of ourselves can mock and can taunt and can say that it's time for us to move on, God forbid, because we can no longer keep living within the past. But the Rebbe tells us that no, on the contrary, Vayhi b'shloshim shana, that with the passing of 30 years, and we can be Besoich HaGoila, deep in the exile, in that place, Niftuchu Hashamayim, the heavens opened, va'erem maros elikim. What is maros elikim? This is the Maaseh Merkava. The Maaseh Merkava refers to the deepest, most esoteric teachings of the Torah, of which Chassidus is a foretaste. It's a foretaste of the Torah Chadash Itite, the Torah which will be revealed to the world in the times of Moshiach. And that is what we have to be working towards. That goal never changed. From the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership in 1950 to the sichos that the Rebbe spoke about in 1991, 92, Tafshin Nun Aleph and Tafshin Nun Beis, 30 years later, that has not changed. The agenda has not changed. Mission still needs to be accomplished. But after 30 years, we have to upgrade to Ben Shloshim L'Koyach. We need to come to greater strength. And indeed, the Rebbe points out that this nevuah was said by Yechezkel. Yechezkel is made up of the words Chazak, Kel. Chazak means strong. Kel is God, the strength that comes from Hashem. And we know that the Yud at the beginning of a word means that it is something which is constant. So Yechezkel means that we constantly have the strength of Hashem, specifically after Shloshim, when we come to Ben Shloshim L'Koyach, which means that after 30 years, we need to advance with even greater urgency, with even greater strength, with greater koyach and greater chizuk, to go and bring about the opening of the heavens, va'erem maros elikim, to reveal the divine presence in the world, to break through those windows, those curtains, those clouds of galus, and to bring the divine presence into the world and bring about the revelation of these deepest teachings of the Maaseh Merkava, the deepest teachings of Torah. So let's tie this all back. At the beginning of our shir, we spoke about the number 30 that the Tzemach Tzedek says that it represents the completion and fullness of the 30 levels or facets of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the way each one comprises 10. And that is the conscious levels of the neshama. The conscious levels of the neshama basically are a limited form of the service of Hashem. It's limited and defined by our ability to understand, but things which are beyond our understanding, that which is super rational, is something which we need to take a leap. We need a greater koyach to be able to attain. When we talk about 30, when we say that 30 refers to the kelim, the vessels of the spheres, 10 kelim, 10 oiros pnimim, and 10 oiros makifim. So Chassidus explains that as lofty as the divine light is, even the oiros makifim, we're talking about godly light. This is the light that emanates from Hashem himself. Chassidus talks about light, and ma'or, the source from which the light emanates. Is a revelation of godliness, which will always be limited, even on its highest of levels. Whereas the ma'or, the very essence of Hashem, is beyond that entirely. So the number 30 means a limitation within godly light, and going beyond 30, Ben Shloshim L'Koyach, means we need to tap into the very essence of Hashem. And so too within our neshama. We can no longer go forward with just nefesh, ruach, and neshama. We can no longer go forward in our avodah in galus to bring about Mashiach with just the consciousness of our soul, with just our seichel, with just our midos, with just our machshava dibur ma'isa. We need to tap into that deeper level, the koyach of the neshama, the esan of the neshama, yechezko of the neshama, which is the yechida, the very essence of the soul. There's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe in Parshas Balak in Likutei Torah. And the pasuk says, "Mi mana afar Yaakov, umana esrei mispar esrei veYisrael." Who can count the dust of Yaakov and the roiva Yisrael? And the Alter Rebbe takes the word roiva out of its literal sense in context of the pasuk and connects it to the word arba, 4, and explains that there are the level represented by the number 3, but then there is the 4th level. The number 3, as we've discussed, nefesh, ruach, neshama, the 3 conscious levels of the neshama, our seichel, our midos, and our functioning. The number 3 represents the lower worlds of bria, yetzira, and asiya. But then there is the roiva Yisrael. Every yid possesses within themselves a 4th dimension. The 4th dimension is that which lies beyond the nefesh, ruach, and neshama. The 4th dimension is that which lies beyond bria, yetzira, and asiya. The 4th is that dimension that lies beyond the 10 kalim, the 10 oros pnimim, and the 10 oros makifim. It represents the very essence, the essence of the soul, and the essence of God, which is one and the same, because the essence of neshama is the essence of God. When we talk about serving Hashem through our intellect and our emotions, I said before that that is something which is going to be limited. But when we serve Hashem with the essence of our soul, that is a level known as the rotzain of the neshama, the deepest desire and bond and oneness that the neshama has with Hashem, from which becomes the source of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is not a logical service of Hashem. To be able to give up our lives, to sacrifice ourselves, to go above and beyond that which logic dictates, is something which is supremely represented by the number 4. And therefore, when we talk about 30 years, the end, Gimmel Tammuz, Lamed Shana, is the end of the passing of 30 years from Gimmel Tammuz, Tafshin and Dalet, and the beginning of the era that is beyond 30, the beginning of the Roiva Yisrael, that which lies beyond 30, which is the very, very essence. And this was something which the Rebbe spoke about, particularly in Tafshin and Aleph and Beis, in connection to the redemption. Because the redemption, the time of Geula, is a time where the Yechida, the very essence of the soul, will be revealed. Moshiach himself is the Yechida, the very essence, in a collective sense, of all of the Jewish souls, much like a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is a Neshama Klalis, a Yechida Klalis, the essence of the soul of every Jew embodied within one person. And therefore, the Avodah that will bring to Moshiach, which will bring us to that level of Yechida, the level of the revelation of the Etzem, is when we do our Avodah from our Etzem. When we engage in the avodah of bringing Moshiach, not because it's something which logically makes sense, not because it's something which emotionally makes sense, but because it is the very essence of who we are, the essence of our soul, which is the essence of God. And that is not limited by the darkness of Golus. The darkness of Golus can plague our minds, can cover over our emotions, but the essence remains intact. The essence remains whole. And perhaps that's why the Nevuah says, Vayhi b'shloishim shana, that it was dafka at the end of the passing of 30 years, that we could be b'soicha, like Yechezkel was, we could be in the midst of a macro golus and a micro golus, as the Rebbe referred to as a golus prati or golus pnimi. And golus pnimi means that our soul is confined, our soul is covered over, it's not being actualized. But when we go beyond Shloishim Shana, ben Shloishim Lakoyach, which is Keser and Chachma, which is the essence of the Neshama, which is beyond the consciousness of the Neshama. When we tap into the Yechezkel, which is the Chazak Kel, the strength of Hashem within ourselves, then in the midst of Galus, we can have Niftachu, Aruba Shemaim, that the heavens, of the Niftachu Shemaim, that the window, the heavens opened up, the Ere Maris Elikim, and we can bring about the Maris Elikim, we can bring about the revelation of God within the world. So I guess the inspiration that we can take from this day, particularly this year, Shloishim Shana from Gimmel Tammuz, is not to be nispoil, not to be affected and clouded by the darkness of Golus, not to be challenged by the darkness of our Yetzer Hara that tells us Nahar Kvar, that we're standing on a river that was in the past. But we tap into the strength of our neshama. And that comes, as we said at the beginning, from the Taina of Korach, that comes from the Rebbe. The role of a Rebbe is to enable us to reveal the essence of our neshama, the Yechidah within inside of ourselves. And with that, we take the Yechezkel, we take the Koyach, and then we are able to do the Avodah no matter what the circumstances are. Because when we tap into the very essence, which lies beyond 30, when we tap into the Yechidah is unbound and is unlimited by any limitation whatsoever. And with that power, we can break through the barriers of Golus. We can rise up above, beyond the limitations of Seder Ishtalshalus, which is defined by the number 30, 10 Kalim, 10 Urs Premium, 10 Urs Makivim, and we can bring about the revelation of the divine. But it's up to us. As we said before, particularly in Chabad, but this is something the Rebbe said at the very first Fabrengen. The Rebbe said, I'm here to help you, but at the end of the day, we need to do the work ourselves. The Rebbe has empowered us and empowers us with many, many tools. We have the teachings of Chassidus, we have the writings of the Rebbe, we have the directives of the Rebbe. The Rebbe set forth what we need to do. And the Rebbe has given us a match. The Rebbe has given us the possibility to light up the essence of our soul. And after 30 years have passed, where hopefully as Chassidim we could say that over the past 30 years, what Gimmel Tammuz represents, which the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that on the day of the passing of a tzaddik, all of their avodah rises up to the greatest of heights and is poil Yeshua is Bekerav Haaretz and affects Hamshachas down into the world. After 30 years, we should all be able to say that the Rebbe's Nesius, the Rebbe's leadership, has permeated my nefesh, my ruach and neshama, my intellect, my emotions, and my behaviors. The Rebbe's perspective, the Rebbe's teachings, the Rebbe's godliness has affected my life in so many different ways. But now I need to tap into that koyach to rise beyond, to face the challenge of going beyond Shloshim Shana, and to finally bring about that which the Rebbe is waiting for us to do, to bring about the Geula, to bring about the opening of the heavens, that from the midst of Golus, B'soich HaGoyla, we'll be able to see Maris Elokim, we'll be able to see visions of God. And visions of God is not only referring to the presence of Hashem himself, but as the Zohar says about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Man Pnei Ha'adon Havaya, who is the face, who is the presence of God within the world? That is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, meaning the Tzaddik Hadar. The Nasi Hadar is the revelation of Maris Elokim within the world. So Be'ezras Hashem, we should all tap into the Ben Shloshim L'Koyach, and we should be able to finalize the Avodah that the Rebbe has set forth for us and is waiting for us to accomplish. And Be'ezras Hashem will be united together, no longer in Golos, not B'soich HaGoyla, not a Nahar Kfar, not a river that was in the past, but will once again have a mighty river flowing with the Maaseh Merkava, flowing with the deepest teachings of Torah, and will be able to be united with the Rebbe once again, with all of the tzaddikim, with all of Nesiim, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu in the third Beis Hamikdash, when Moshiach Tzidkenu take off from Miyad Mamish.
Amen. Yasher Koyach.